We have a good friend, Andy McCarthy, who is a National Review contributing editor. He's also a former chief assistant U.S. attorney and a guy who, when he speaks, I almost always agree with him. And when I don't, I'm probably wrong, especially when it comes to things like this, because this is his expertise. He was a former chief assistant U.S. attorney, and he worked on terror most of his career. I mean, he is well versed on terror charges and how to try them. This Luigi Mangione case, the terrorism charges have been dropped, and Andy, if I remember right, came out with an article, I think of last year, and said this is not going to stand. These terrorism charges aren't going to stand, and I don't understand why they won't. And I also don't understand how he's now only going to be charged with second-degree murder when it was clear he was stalking the guy. He planned on killing him. He was waiting for him outside. I mean, that's premeditation, which is murder one. But I know Andy will have all the answers for us. Can you make sense of this for us, Andy?
Yeah, I'm afraid I can, Glenn. I think to start with the second point first about why it's murder two rather than murder one. Back in the Pataki days, which is like the 1990s in New York when he was governor, they tried to revise the New York capital murder statute. They wanted, because they haven't done a death penalty case in New York in decades. And this ultimately was not a successful effort. They still haven't revived the death penalty. But what they did was they took the things that you could get the death penalty for, which in New York were only things like killing a police officer or killing a prison guard in the prison, and they made those the only murder in the first degree varieties of homicide, and all other murder. Well, because they were trying to clean up, their idea was they were trying to clean the statute in a way that murder one would be revived as capital murder.
Death penalty.
And all other murder was going to be second-degree murder. So because what we're dealing with Mangione under New York law would not have qualified for the death penalty because that would have been very, very narrow, and it's mainly killing police officers or prison guards. That puts it into the category of second-degree murder. That doesn't mean, by the way, that it's unserious. It has I think the offense in New York is like 25 years to life. So it's for
the
a
guy
state
should
that doesn't
get.
have
I mean, you can argue against the death penalty, but the guy should get either the death penalty or life without parole, not 25 years. This guy
that's what he's looking at.
Help me out on this one. How is he not a terrorist? He had the intent to terrorize. He said himself he wanted people to look over their shoulders. I mean, he is a textbook terrorist and premeditation. Textbook.
To prove terrorism, you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt an intent to intimidate or coerce a civilian population. And you have to sort of get out of the mindset that murder is terrorizing. I mean, all murder is terrorizing to the people who are obviously involved in it and to the extent that it intimidates people. But we can't turn every murder into terrorism.
Correct.
But
terrorism
he did it is about us.
But isn't terrorism about trying to scare the population to either vote different or change the laws to be so terrorized that they, in this particular case, he was trying to send a message to the industry. You better watch your back because there's more of me, and you'll get it in the end. That's terrorizing a group of people to get them to act in a way the terrorist wants them to act.
Yes, but it's not terrorizing.
Isn't that how we define it?
It's not terrorizing the government to change policy or terrorizing the whole civilian population. What the judge said is this was very narrowly targeted at the healthcare industry and this particular healthcare executive. And I guess I just don't think it trivializes the murder to say that it's not a terrorism crime.
Okay.
You know, the federal government, Glenn, just so we're clear on this part of it, There were two charges brought here. There's the federal charges and the state charges. So Alvin Bragg, the New York DA, brought the terrorism charge.
Joke.
I said at the time I thought he was bringing it because he knew the Justice Department wanted to charge this guy, so he wanted to make a splash like the Justice Department wanted to make a splash.
Oh.
The Justice Department, when the Justice Department indicted it, even though Biden is against the death penalty and the Democratic administration was against the death penalty, they indicted it as a death penalty case because they wanted to make a big to-do over it, even though, if you look at the fine print, they would never impose the death penalty. They had a moratorium on the death penalty. So in order not to be outsplashed, what Bragg turned around and did was indict this, what he would, like 10 times out of 10, indict only as a murder case, if you could get Bragg to indict something that was actually a crime.
Right.
And he decided to make it a terrorism murder case so that, they could compete for the headlines in the press. Unfortunately, this is kind of what happens in these turf battle cases. But to your point about stalking and all that stuff, the federal charges, which are the death penalty charges, include exactly what you're talking about, the fact that this guy was stalked, that it was done in a very cold-blooded way. And I think actually if he gets convicted in the federal system, now that Trump is running the Justice Department rather than Biden, if he gets convicted on the death penalty charge, he's going to get the death penalty.
Okay, so it's not like he's getting murder in the second degree and he'll be out in 25 years. The federal government is also trying him. Will it be the same trial? No.
In fact, the interesting thing, Glenn, from a political standpoint, I hate having to get political in this stuff.
I know.
You can't
Me too.
Avoid it. The Biden Justice Department was working cooperatively with Bragg. I don't think the Trump Justice Department is going to work cooperatively with Bragg. And the interesting thing about that is under New York law, they have a very forgiving double jeopardy provision, which basically means if the feds go first, that will probably block New York State from going at all because of their expansive protection. And I think what Biden's Justice Department was willing to let Bragg go first so that they'd go second and then everybody would have a piece
Trump
of this.
Won't do that.
I'm not sure that Trump's guys are going to play ball like that.
Okay, so are you confident that justice will be served in this?
Well, I think that, look, I think if your idea is justice served, will this guy be convicted of a severe murder charge and never see the light of day again? I am confident in that.
Yes.
If you believe, as I do, that if you're going to have a death penalty in the law, which our Constitution permits,
he deserves it.
If you're going to have it, he deserves it. And if he doesn't get it, he would be, he'd be among a long line of people who probably deserved it and didn't get it. So I guess it depends on what your idea of justice is, but I guess if we can agree that justice is this guy never sees the light of day again, I think justice will happen here.
Okay. Can I switch to Charlie Kirk? How is this unfolding? What are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on, I really want to make sure we don't go too far. I don't want another Patriot Act kind of thing. But I do believe, it appears as though there may have been many people involved, at least in knowing. What does that mean to you, and what should happen? What should we be doing? What are we doing that is right and wrong?
Well, to the I do think, Glenn, that this is being very aggressively investigated by both the state authorities and continuing by the federal authorities. I heard Kash Patel, because I happened to be on television this morning, and they broadcast that while I was on, and he was talking about how they are going through all of the social media stuff to see who may have had an inkling about this beforehand. And if there was any conspiratorial activity, they're going to go after it. Now, the chats that have come out so far that have been reported in the last couple of days are chats in which Robinson admitted to committing the homicide and told the people that he was chatting with that he had already arranged his surrender. If that's all these people knew, that is to say that he had, he was confessing and he was turning himself in, well, they might be good witnesses in terms of what his state of mind was at the trial of Robinson, but I don't think that implicates them in criminal misconduct. On the other hand, the feds are going to keep digging, and I assume Utah is going to keep digging. And if they find out that somebody was involved in planning this, I think those people are going to be pursued.
There's probably Texas would be a bad place to commit this crime. Utah, however, they have the death penalty, and they use the death penalty. And the governor, who I'm not a big fan of this governor, but boy, he has been very strong and I think right on top of this whole thing. And he said, day one, you will get the death penalty. We catch you, we prove it in court of law, you will get the death penalty. And I think that's coming for this guy.
It should. It's deserving, because if there's ever anything that's indicative of premeditation and repulsive intent, I would say this is a textbook case of that.
The idea that Trump is now going to go after possibly RICO charges for people like George Soros and organizations like that are pushing for a lot of the Antifa kind of stuff. Do you see any problems with that, or is this a good idea?
I just think the first thing, before you get into RICO and all these, RICO is a very complicated statute, even when it obviously applies. So I think the bedrock thing they have to establish is that you are crossing the line from protected speech, a lot of which can be obnoxious speech, and actual incitement to violence. And if you can get incitement to violence, I didn't need RICO to prosecute the blind sheikh, right? I was able to do it on incitement to violence and that kind of stuff. Those are less complicated charges than RICO, but the big challenge in those cases, Glenn, is getting across the line into violent action as opposed to, constitutionally protected rhetoric.
Is there anything to the subversion of our nation on, that you're intentionally subverting the United States of America? You're pushing for revolutionary acts? There's a lot of litigation that arose out of that in connection with the Cold War and the McCarran Act, and you remember all the stuff from the 40s and 50s forward. Yeah, I know.
And I think when that stuff was initially enacted, the country was in a different place. I think when the McCarran Act was enacted, it was a consensus in the country that if someone was a member of the Communist Party, hadn't actually done anything active to seek the violent overthrow of the U.S., but mere membership in the party, I think if you asked that question in 1950, most people would have thought that was a crime. And by 1980, most people would have thought it wasn't a crime based on what the Supreme Court was doing with the First Amendment.
If you're a member of the Communist Party, you can be a member of the Communist Party. But if you are actively subverting and pushing for revolution in our country, I think that's a different. I think that's a different cat all entirely.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If you have that evidence of purposeful activity, and look, if you have a conspiratorial agreement between two people that contemplates the use of force, you don't need much more than that. You don't need an act of violence if you have strong enough evidence of conspiracy, but you do have to establish that they get over that line into the use of force, at least the potential use of force.
Okay. Andy, as always, thank you so much. Appreciate your insight.